This is The Meaningful Way. I'm your host, Luke Iorio. Discovering who we are, what we're meant to do and be, and our voice is going to be central to our conversation today. And it's through the winding journey of our lives that we uncover the patterns that have been there all along, pointing the way to us. And today we get to get into that with our fantastic guest. She's a firm believer that we cannot separate who we are from what we do. Sandra Sedgbeer combines her love of broadcasting with her pioneering work as a media and marketing consultant, advising authors, teachers, speakers, and individuals how to apply the science of resonance to build their platforms, profiles, and develop programs and products that people don't just like, but they love. Born and raised in the UK, Sandy is the author of 6 books published by major international publishing houses. She has also been a frequent guest on all of Britain's most popular TV and radio shows, and her books have been translated into multiple languages. Sandy also hosts the weekly Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om, which is now also being syndicated as a podcast on iHeartRadio. What's more is that she has interviewed renowned guests on the Virtual Light Internet TV show, including the likes of Gene Houston, Don Miguel Ruiz, and Michael Bernard Beckwith, to name just a few. Sandy's shows are dedicated to showcasing the world's leading thinkers, scientists, authors, educators, parenting experts, and spiritual leaders whose ideas are at the leading edge where science and spirituality meet. And with that, I cannot wait to dive into her insights today. Sandy, welcome to The Meaningful Way.
Oh, hello, Luke, and thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I was thinking a little bit, maybe if we could begin with this, because I think you've described yourself as a bit of a shameless sharer. I know you've done some really interesting things in terms of this resonance work, and I was hoping you could share a bit about who you are now, and then we'll go back into yesteryear, into a little bit of the journey.
Goodness, who am I now? Well, shameless sharer really does sum it all up, because I find it impossible when I come across something that is really good, really cutting edge, really helpful to people, I have to share it. Sometimes, even to my own detriment, because I give so much information away. But I think, in a sense, that's it. I'm a seeker, a spiritual explorer. And I've asked all the big questions, and I've reached a stage in my life where I feel that I recognize what is true for me. I listen to my gut in a way I never did when I was younger, and that always tells me, it's my compass, if you like, to truth. And once I find that truth, I really need to share it with others. I'm a Gemini, so, communication is everything. It's no good me just having the information and keeping it to myself.
If you could talk, because it's funny, I was going to ask you a bit more about what you share, but you started to enlighten us. I was hoping you can go a little further on when you say true for you and how that has pointed your way to the truth. Expand on that. What do you mean true for you, and then what's the truth?
Well, what is the truth? I mean, the truth is a movable feast. And it really is about what is, I do believe we create our own reality. And so to push our truth onto others and expect them to take it as their truth is a big mistake. All we can do is share with others and let them make their own, judgment about whether it resonates with them. Resonance is something that has been with me all my life, and I never realized it, probably until about 15 years ago, that's what I was doing my entire life. I think we all know when something resonates with us, and I tend to see resonance as an invisible thread, and it connects me and you. When you and I are resonating, that thread is vibrating between us, and we can feel our way through our conversations. There's a subtext that goes on that, for me, underpins everything, with that veneer of honesty and sincerity and authenticity. And I think for me, truth is whatever feels authentic, real, and purposeful for me. But as I'm a shameless sharer, when I come across something that I think is exciting, you know, a book, a piece of information, you know, I'm an avid researcher, always have been, then I feel this is something people need to know about, because if they know about it, they can decide whether it is for them or not.
Mm-hmm. So I want to start a little bit back a few years and talk about the journey of how you got here, because I think the idea or the conclusion of being able to recognize that it's about sharing with others, that we cannot force what we see as true on others. We need to share, we need to converse from that place and see where that leads the conversations and leads each other, I think is an important distinction. And I think that finding the resonance of what rings true for you and tapping into that sincerity, that authenticity, I think is something that people are really hanging on to in today's times, and they're really looking for and searching out within themselves to tap into. But before we get further into that, where did this journey begin? Because you're quite literally a long way from home.
I am a long way from home, and a very, very long way from my roots. Obviously, I grew up in England in the 50s, and in what is known as the East End of London, which is the poor part of London. And but I was always curious. I was always an observer, watching how people interacted. And from a very early age, I knew several things. One was that I wanted to be a writer. Don't ask me how I knew that, but my mother told me I said it when I was 4. I also was always puzzling people out, what is it that makes people behave the way they do, think the way they do, talk the way they do. And I think, like many children, we have so many innate gifts that they get suppressed as we go through childhood and into adulthood. And I think many children are very good at recognizing mismatches when someone is saying something to them, and yet their body language, everything within them is broadcasting something different. I think kids are very good at recognizing that. Mm-hmm. And I recognized that very early, and it gave me this real interest in human nature. Who are we, and why do we do the things we do, and how is it that we develop the interests and the talents and the skills and the desires that we do. So psychology was a big passion in my life, and I didn't start studying psychology until I was in my 20s and 30s, along with astrology. And astrology I started studying to disprove it. Psychology I studied because I just wanted to delve into it and learn more. But what's interesting is I found that the astrology bore out so much stuff in the psychology, that we really do have these biases, these tendencies. The chart shows up, and I don't know that it's the chart that gives it to us, or whether it's us that choose the chart. But I think I started my career as a journalist because I was, I'm such a researcher. I was always researching knowledge and information. I'm very curious. I'm very nosy, and I like to share the information that I get. So that's how I started my career, and then went into writing books. But I also got very involved in editing magazines and launching magazines, conceptualizing magazines, and managing them. And through that, I then got asked to go and work at a large advertising agency, which many of my friends said you shouldn't be doing. You can't be a jack of all trades. You've just got to stick to one thing. But I was so interested to know about advertising because, again, there's so much psychology wrapped up in that. Mm-hmm. And so I went, and they gave me wonderful opportunities to just follow my instincts and put things into operation that people said, no, you can't do that. That's not the way it's done. And but I was able to prove that when you understand people, when you understand yourself, because everybody's like us, we all have the same needs and wants and desires. But when you understand people, you can talk to them in a different way, and you can communicate with them in a really authentic manner, where you're not selling them anything, you're just sharing information. And if it resonates with them, and if you resonate with them, the way you're communicating, if they feel that thread of truth in what you're saying, they will become a customer. And I proved that over and over again. And it's not just about being a customer. It's about having an audience, or having an authentic communication, or an exchange, whether it's of products or information. And I think that was a driving force that I never understood until probably about 15 years ago. I came to America in 1999 and steeped myself at that point in the spiritual community. And I think that's when I really began to accelerate my understanding of myself, and looking back on the things that I'd done when I'd stuck my neck out and took chances on different things or persuaded magazines to do things, always things that, benefited the readers. I began to see that that's what it was all about. It was that thing about resonance and authentic communication that led me all the way.
So I want to get a little deeper into that resonance, but just before we do, just before you came over to the States in '99, I know there was a series of kind of experiences and moments where you were starting to get quite a bit of notoriety for the work that you were doing. You were getting great visibility for the work that you were doing, and even some fame. And you acknowledged it at a time that wasn't quite where you wanted to go. And I was wondering if you could share a bit about that, and what was it that you recognized kind of in yourself, maybe that deeper resonance, that your journey was in a slightly different direction?
Well, one of the other things that I learned when I was a small child was that I wanted to be noticed. I wanted to be acknowledged. And I grew up in a children's home, or at least I spent 8 years from the ages of 3 to 11 in a children's home. And so I was just one of many children. And I went to a school outside of the home, and, my friends' parents pitied me, felt sorry for me, and other children looked down on me. So I always felt less than. And I developed, this idea that one day people would notice me. And I think part of the wanting to be a writer, it wasn't just to be a writer, it was to be a famous writer, because then people would say, oh, she was somebody after all. And that ambition pushed me throughout my teens and my 20s. And when I started writing books, I did have quite a bit of notoriety and even fame. And I was driving around England doing interviews. And one winter, I was in the north of England doing a morning talk TV show. And when I came off camera, one of the producers said to me, somebody's just called into the studio who used to be a friend of yours, and they would like us to give you their telephone number. And I looked at the number, and I remembered the person. It was somebody I'd known, had been a friend at the time that I was married. And I just suddenly began to think about him on the way home. And it took me 3-4 hours to get back to London in the snow. And I don't know what happened, but I had an instant download. I don't know how it came about, but it was as if, probably a minute's worth of understanding was crammed into, a few seconds. And I suddenly saw it completely, that I had been pushing for fame, striving for fame, feeling that people would think that I was somebody, that I counted. And in there somewhere was this whole, dialogue, this narrative of, okay, so the people who didn't treat me very well when I was young, they'll see me and they'll feel sorry and they'll go, oh, she was somebody after all. Wish I hadn't been so cruel or whatever. And it suddenly hit me that, of course, I changed my name. So, how those people probably wouldn't even know. Even if they did know, and even if they did recognize me on television, and even if they had that thought, oh my goodness, she is somebody after all, how would I ever know? And in that moment, it was like, oh my God, you have been following this path. You have been striving for this for the wrong reasons. And it hit me in my gut so strongly. And I thought, wow, you've got a lot of work to do on yourself. And you can't do this, because whatever fame you get, it's going to be meaningless because it's for the wrong reasons. Yeah. So at that point, I started pulling back, and I think I wrote 2 more books, but I did the TV circuit, but I didn't push in the same way that I had. And when I'd fulfilled the 6th book, I decided that was enough. I had nothing else to say at that moment, because I was not qualified to say anymore. It was time for me to go and do my own inner work. And that's what I did, and that's what led me to America.
You know, I think you're touching on one of the subjects that seems to come up a lot on this show, is that point where we realize the path that we've been going after was almost it wasn't the real path. It wasn't the real goal that we were actually after. We were fulfilling, there was a pattern there. We were fulfilling something that we felt we were lacking or needing, or, you know, something to prove something to ourselves. And then there's this moment where we realize the effect that that pattern has had on our lives, and it opens us up to this whole other world. And it may be a very uncertain time, like you said. We don't always know exactly what's next or what it's going to look like, but it opens us up to all of these other possibilities that we never considered. And I think where I'd love for you to take us is that when you then come over and you start to connect to some of the spiritual work and some of the inner work, it leads you to this idea of resonance. And what I get from part of this, and I want to see where this fits in, is that when we find that resonance, what it sounds like to me is it's that we find something congruent within ourselves, that we find something deeper that we're connecting to that seems like it is in the right, the right frequency, that it's congruent, it's aligned to who we truly are. And then all of a sudden it seems to come out of you. And I'm curious, how does that fit into your journey and some of the work that you were doing and discovering?
When I came to America, within 6 weeks of arriving in San Diego, I met a number of people who truly became my spiritual family. And there was a deep knowing on meeting these people that these were people that I could trust and relax with. And I started an online magazine called Planet Lightworker. And during the 10 years that I produced that online magazine, I met many authors, teachers, spiritual speakers and leaders, and some of them were very congruent and some of them were not. And this was very palpable for me. And I began to think about that, and began to think, well, what is it within me that knows that? And it took a while, but I came to realize that we are all born with this ability, and we all are born with certain gifts and certain passions and abilities, and I think we learn to ignore those parts of us that in a guidance system that is leading us to where we need to go in order to do what we've come here to do. And I began to realize that I had this inner knowing within me. The writing, was definitely something was on the right track, but I'd diverted it and, in a sense, perverted that desire into something else that was purely about me and my ego. The resonance, it's interesting because people used to say to me, as a journalist, as an author, as an editor, you're damn good at spotting typos. How do you do it? And I had one guy I was working with, and I'd walk into his office and his manuscript would be on his screen about 5 feet away, and I'd immediately go, there's a typo there. And he'd go, damn it, how do you do it? And I began to think about that. What is it within me that recognizes a typo? Because it's the same thing within me that recognizes inauthenticity. And I studied NLP and hypnotherapy some years ago, and so I decided to do a process on myself where I slowed down my reactions. And I came to the conclusion that when I spotted a typo, it signaled me because there was a discomfort in my tummy, in my gut, in that second brain. And it was something is not fitting, it's not matching, it's not in place. And quickly, that message would be sent to my brain, and I'd stop and I'd interpret it as a typo. I'd look for it, and there it was. It's the same thing as when we meet somebody and we know that what they're saying is one thing, but what they're really feeling and thinking, there's another story underneath it. We all have it. And I began to call it the typo in my tummy because I didn't know what else to name it. But that I think it's also part of our connection. We're all connected. How can we not be? Therefore, how can we not tap into one another and know when we're speaking the truth or speaking our truth, when we're being congruent and authentic with what we believe?
How how do you suggest that for those that are listening in on us today, how do they start to tune in to the typo in their tummy, the inner guidance system, as you described it before, so that they can hone it again? Because I think you're right. I think we're born with certain innate abilities to detect this, to sense this connection that we have with others, but for any number of reasons, we kind of lose touch with it. How do we reconnect to that, and then how do we hone it?
Well, one of the things you mentioned earlier, one of the most valuable things I've learned is that we cannot separate who we are and what we do from how we interact in the world. And, we are broadcasting all of the time on subtle energetic levels and along those threads that connect us. And I think resonance is one of the most profound things. And I think we need to practice self-inquiry, because we all know the answers. We've got it all in there. We just have to find the way to, reconcile with it and acknowledge it and, bring it back to the surface and make it a guiding light. I think that if we practice self-inquiry and we ask ourselves questions, about the things that we've loved, the things that we know, the things that we don't like, why do we not like them? Why is it that when we meet someone, we don't trust them? When we begin to examine things like that, we begin to connect with our own gift of being able to recognize that thread. It never lets us down.
That's interesting, because with that process of self-inquiry, we're almost using that same ability that we have to begin to recognize the mismatch in others to recognize some of the mismatch in ourselves, right? Yes. So we're sensing that what's fallen out of alignment, what have we gotten away from, what are the parts of ourselves that we're not yet reconnected to? And the more that we tune into that, the more we tune into others.
Absolutely.
So take me through, as people go through this part of their inner work and they begin to reconnect to these pieces, you've got this extraordinary gift to help them then connect the discovery of what they're finding inside and who they are to what they do. And in the sense of turning it in, whether it be to programs or books or whatever their message is going to be out in the world, even if that message is to their parents, not to a client, how do you help bring that out and connect them from what's going on inside and the alignment they're now reconnecting to, and bring it out so they can externalize it, so they can voice it?
When I'm working with people, whether it's a book, a business, or an individual, or in a relationship, whatever, one of the first things I do is, because I absolutely believe that our soul is driving us right from the start in ways that we're not consciously aware of, and with a purpose that we often can't imagine. So, I make that fairly plain. I've studied many tools over the years. I studied NLP, I studied hypnotherapy, I've studied astrology and numerology and human design, and all of these things that give us information about ourselves. If we can develop self-awareness, that's a wonderful thing. And so I use a combination of things, looking at somebody's astrology, for example, looking at their human design and how they're born to respond to things in the world. And I usually give my clients those details for themselves, and they can begin to feel that resonance. Oh yeah, that piece of astrology there, that is so me. And that thing that was flagged up in human design, that is me too. I innately recognize it. There's one other piece of work that I found very profound and that was instrumental in helping me really understand that what I'm all about is resonance. And that is a body of work called The Invisible Garment. And it's loosely based on astrology in the sense that we look at the degrees of where planets are. And that number relates to one of 30 principles. And it's a book and it's a body of work by a woman called Connie Kaplan, The Invisible Garment. And it's something like 30 spiritual principles that basically drive us in this life. And it's based on information that she received in channel from some archangels. And she meditated on it for many years, did some work, and eventually developed this piece of work according to their information. And for me, it is the astrology of the soul. normal astrology is the astrology of this life. It can give us pinpoints into previous lives, but it focuses on this personality, this incarnation. And what the invisible garment does is focuses on what you actually came in with, the areas of mastery. And Connie Kaplan said that the archangel said to her that we don't come here to school, we don't come here to learn something. What we do is we come here to shine our light. And it is in the expression of our being that we create our doing. And when I studied her book and I started applying those principles to everybody in my life, because I already had all their charts because I'd done them, I was getting so many breakthroughs and answers about my children and people I knew and why they were the way they were and did the things they did, had the interests they had. And I began to use it with my clients, and I'd say, look at this and tell me if this resonates with you. And people would cry because they felt, it's like, oh my God, somebody's talking to my soul, and I know it without knowing how I know it. And I think, that's what we have to do. To use whatever tools we can, whatever guidance, whatever coaching we can, to get to that place within us where it all resides, and then to begin to trust it and live our lives by it. And I've used this with people who wanted to start businesses, and by the end of it, they've decided not to start that business because it actually isn't what they came here to do. Yeah. It's something they felt they needed to do in order to achieve something else. So that for me is, I can't separate that from straightforward resonance marketing, which is all about communication and authenticity.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we can go into from that, but the few pieces that really stand out is that pathway of awareness and using all the different tools of self-discovery and self-uncovering that we can, it allows us to begin to connect to something that is deeper and to be able to listen to or feel that resonance when we get those big insights, when we get that big wisdom that comes through, to be able to sit with it. And the way in which you described it in terms of how it's the expression of our being that then guides and creates our doing, I think the thing that's interesting is that when we connect to that resonance, that deeper truth that we find, it's almost as if we now are getting to the point where we know that it's about letting it through, not about going and creating something to make it happen. And
absolutely.
Right? And so I think there's just, it's an incredible pathway that people are beginning to discover, is to find this, and how can they bring more of that joy, more of that peace, more of that freedom, these things that are deeper within us, and connect to it. But it really is more about letting it through, being it, and in the being of it, we'll do more of it, we'll receive more of it, we'll experience more of it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Luke, you've told me your own story, and you've told me various other pieces of information. When we are fully aligned with who we are, everything, nothing bothers us. Everything is a joy. People go, I spent, 29 years of my life chasing something that I thought I needed in order to make me whole. We are already whole. And people talk about, the uncharted territories. We've conquered space, or part of it. Now we're going to conquer the ocean. The best uncharted territory to investigate is within.
Absolutely. It is the inner space that we've got so much to explore and so much to learn and so much to understand. And so I guess maybe if we've been chatting away for a while now, and maybe if I bring this back full circle, the name of the show is The Meaningful Way. And so what comes to mind for you when I ask you, what is your meaningful way?
My meaningful way in everything I do is to feel completely engaged and excited by what's in front of me without a shadow. I don't even have to think about, is this right? Is this a good person to be working with? The absence of the typo in the tummy is a beautiful thing. And it's my signal, just go, because with this, you can flow and bring all that you are to it. So for me, that's the only meaningful way forward in anything that I do.
That's absolutely beautiful, and I love the reconnection back to even the typo in the tummy, and that reminder for all of us that there are things that we begin to understand and connect to in this world that help us understand what we don't want, what is disconnected, and therefore lead us back to a place that is deeper within us, that is what we are really truly meant to connect to. And
Absolutely.
I absolutely love all of the insights and the wisdom that you've had to share with us today along that path. So Sandy, thank you so much for joining us here.
Luke, thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a shameless sharer.
We appreciate it. And for everyone, I think probably just the biggest thing to focus on for the next week is to begin to really deeply listen to yourself. Deeply listen to what's going on inside of you. Where's your mind taking you? Where's your gut taking you? What are you feeling? Where's your heart? And to begin to tune back into that, because all of the gifts, everything you have ever possessed in your life, all the way back to the time that you were a child, are still there, and you can reconnect to it. And when you do, you'll not only feel like you're completely congruent and aligned, but you're also going to play a lot more. And when you play a lot more, you're going to have a whole lot more fun on this journey. So with that in mind, everybody, until next time, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this, you'll want to check out the 7-Day Shift, a brand new online program designed to help you experience the even more meaningful life that's awaiting you. Just head to lukeiorio.com/7-day shift to register.